Hello learners, this is Dr. Shibani Basu Dubey, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English at the Bhopal School of Social Sciences, Bhopal. Today, we are going to take up a very simple topic in English literature, beginning level. It is language and literature, a study of figures of speech. So, if you look at the overview of today's series, it is language and literature, figures of speech, and I will be basically covering these 6 figures of speech: viz, imagery, personification, simile, metaphor, hyperbole and onomatopoeia. Right? Now the basic question which comes to the mind of every learner of English language and literature is, what is the basic difference between language and literature? भाषा and साहित्य, ये दोनों terms अपने आप में बिल्कुल different meaning रखते हैं, although they are still very closely intertwined. Now that is the main question, that what is the difference between language and literature? Now the definition of language, as you can see on the slide, it shows that language means the system of verbal or non-verbal signs which are used by living beings so as to convey information, feelings, thoughts, etc. So language is actually an arbitrary symbol which is used for the purpose of communication. It is a method of communication which comprises of sounds, words and grammar. It has certain grammatical rules. There are certain rules for syntax and structure that let people pronounce the words in such a way that it is understood by others. Now, when I read out this definition, you can easily understand that language is a very basic, important mode or medium of communication, right? Now, how do you define literature? Literature refers to any written or spoken material regarded as an art form which has some intellectual value due to the use of language in a manner which is different from its normal use. Now, as Charles Bukowski has said, without literature, life is hell, because ultimately literature creates the basic fabric of human society. Now, let me just narrate an anecdote to you. Once Kalidas was going with his friend, and this was the same question that his friend put forth for him, that what is the difference between bhasha and sahitya, language and literature. And let me tell you how Kalidas explained it to his friend. He said that there is a piece of wood lying in front. What do you have to say about this piece of wood? And his friend said, Shushkam kashtam tishtati agre. What does that mean? Shushkam, सूखी हुई, काष्ठम, लकड़ी, तिष्ठति अग्रे, सामने पड़ा हुआ है. And Kalidas told his friend that the same thing now I will tell in the language of literature. मैं यही बात एक साहित्यिक भाषा में आपको बताता हूँ. And he came up with the explanation, नीरस तरुवर पूरत भाले. Neeras, what do you mean by neeras? Something which has lost its rasa. Rasa is vitality, right? Taruvar, taru is tree. Purat bhale, which has completed its life cycle. So see the difference. Shushkam kashtham tishtati agre and neeras taruvar purat bhale. Now I hope you have understood the difference between bhasha and sahitya. Now there are certain things which actually is mandatory. There are certain things which are actually mandatory in order to convert language up to the level of literature. Now here in the slide you can see a basic comparison chart between what is language and what is literature based on their meaning, nature, what they comprise of and the concern with and what they stimulate. So if you go as per meaning, literature refers to the body of the written or spoken composition of a special kind on a particular topic, whereas language implies any form of expression or communication by the living organisms through arbitrary signals. Now, what is the nature of literature? It is imaginative. What is the nature of language? It is expressive. What does literature comprise of? It comprises of written oral works with intellectual thoughts and contemplation. What does language comprise of? Language comprises of system of sounds, words, grammar rules, etc. Literature is concerned with life experiences, whereas language is concerned with discourses. Literature stimulates recreation and revelation of facts and thoughts, whereas language stimulates interaction between living organisms. Now, when you try to understand language and literature, there is another very important component which you need to understand, that is the denotative meaning and the connotative meaning. The denotative is the literal meaning of any term and connotative is the figurative meaning of any term. Now, the dictionary meaning of rose would be a flower. That is the denotative or the literal meaning. But the connotative, that is the deeper meaning, what we associate the word with, it can be very deep. The rose can symbolize love, passion, romance, death, duality. Everything can be explained through the connotative meaning of rose. Now look at this example which is given in the slide. So when you look at this slide, look at the very good examples given on the slide. The boy's room was messy. But the moment you say the boy's room was a pigsty, it is figurative, it is connotative, because you have to actually imagine a pigsty, how messy, how dirty it can be, and that's how the boy's room looks like. The left fielder dropped the baseball. This is the sentence. But then the left fielder has butter fingers. So you now know it is a connotative meaning, butter fingers, because the ball slipped out of it. These are figures of speech. Alright. Now that makes us come to the point, what are figures of speech basically? Now figures of speech are actually instruments with which you can decorate, beautify language so as to raise it up to the level of literature. So in order to make language more flowery, you use figures of speech. Now there are certain definitions of figures of speech given here. It's a plural noun, a word or a phrase used in a non-literal sense for rhetorical or vivid effect. That it was what is figure of speech. X.J. Kennedy has defined it as a figure of speech may be said to occur whenever a speaker or writer, for the sake of freshness or emphasis, departs from the usual denotations of words. So he doesn't use it as the dictionary meaning, but instead uses it in a connotative manner, and that is what is figure of speech. Wren and Martin, the famous grammarian, they have described figure of speech as it is a departure from the ordinary form of expression or the ordinary course of ideas in order to produce greater effect. Let us begin with some popular and frequently used figures of speech, right? So the first figure of speech which I am going to take for explanation, it is imagery. Now what does imagery mean? Imagery means to use figurative language to represent objects, actions and ideas in such a way that it appeals to our physical senses. Now you understand what are physical senses. There are 5 sensory organs: ear, nose, eyes, tongue and skin. So any description which actually has an impact, affects your sensory organs, it is an imagery. Now look at the example given in the box. The hot July sun cast an orange glare over the ocean waves. So hot July sun, you can feel the heat of the sun. Orange glare, you can immediately imagine the orange color. Ocean waves, and probably you can even hear the sound of the ocean waves. So thus this description that the hot July sun cast an orange glare over the ocean waves is a wonderful example of an imagery, because it is actually touching our sense of skin, sense of listening, sense of eyes seeing as well. As a literary device, imagery consists of descriptive language that can function as a way for the reader to better imagine the world of the piece of literature and also add symbolism to the work. Imagery draws on 5 senses, namely the details of taste, touch, sight, smell and sound, as I mentioned. Imagery helps the reader develop a more fully realized understanding of the imaginary world that the author has created. Now this is an example of imagery from Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. It seems she hangs upon the cheek of a knight like a rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear. Now here Romeo is actually praising Juliet by saying that she appears more radiant than the brightly lit torches. He further says that at night her face glows like a bright jewel shining against the dark skin of an African. Through the contrasting images of light and dark, Romeo actually portrays Juliet's beauty, and it is a very vivid imagery. Next, we move on to personification. Personification is a figure of speech in which a thing, an idea, or an animal is given human attributes. The non-human objects are portrayed in such a way that we feel that they have the ability to act like human beings. For example, the flame of the candle danced in the dark. Now, can a flame dance? No. Dancing is such a human attribute. But here that human attribute is associated to the flame, and thus you say the flame of the candle danced in the dark. Now, there is this example of personification from literature, A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. Titania, she says, no night is now with him or carol blessed, therefore the moon, the governess of floods, pale in her anger, washes all the air, that rheumatic diseases do abound. Now, in this example of personification, Shakespeare uses the concept of the moon as a character. The moon is feminized as often as it is in literature, if given a gender, and said to be a governess of floods. The color of the moon lends to the depiction of her anger, and she is said to cause more diseases to spread due to her displeasure. Shakespeare thus gives the moon new descriptive qualities, emotions, and motivation. We move on to the next figure of speech, which is a simile. A simile is actually a figure of speech that makes a comparison showing similarities between two different things. Unlike a metaphor, a simile draws resemblance with the help of the words like or as. Therefore, it is a direct comparison. Now, simile is poetically explaining how things are like other things. Just like a prayer, your voice can take me there. Just like a muse to me, you are a mystery. So, like a, as a, these are the comparisons. Just like a prayer, your voice. Just like a muse, you are a mystery. Alright, so this is a comparative device. Now, example of simile from literature, I have taken it from Lord Jim by Joseph Conrad. I would have given anything for the power to soothe her frail soul, tormenting itself in its invincible ignorance like a small bird beating about the cruel wires of a cage. In these lines from Lord Jim, the helplessness of the soul is being compared with a bird in a cage beating itself against the merciless wires to be free. Now we move on to the next figure of speech. It is a metaphor. A metaphor is a figure of speech that makes an implicit, implied, or hidden comparison between two things that are unrelated but which share some common characteristics. In other words, a resemblance of two contradictory or different objects is made based on a single or some common characteristics. Metaphor is poetically calling things something else. You ain't nothing but a hound dog crying all the time. So, that person is being compared to a hound dog, and what are the characteristics? Similar characteristic, it is the crying. The hound dogs also cry and he is also crying. So, both are brought together with a metaphor. It is like, in a simile, it is very direct. My love is like a beautiful red rose. So, like a beautiful red rose, but the moment you say, oh, my love is a red rose, what is happening? The simile or the comparison is very implied, and that is how it becomes a metaphor. Now, this example of metaphor from literature by John Milton. Invoke thy aid to my adventurous song that with no middle flight intends to soar above the Aeonian mount. This is a good metaphor by Milton from his epic Paradise Lost. Here Milton has compared his poetry to a dove who is aspiring to fly higher in the sky. Next we move on to the definition of hyperbole. It is derived from a Greek word meaning overcasting. It is a figure of speech that involves an exaggeration of ideas, and the significance of that exaggeration is It emphasizes something. And look at the example. I am so hungry I could eat a horse. So is it not humanly possible? It is not possible to eat a complete horse, but then it is a hyperbolic expression wherein it is said that I could eat a horse. Now this is an example of hyperbole from literature. I have taken it from Macbeth by Shakespeare. Neptune's ocean washed this blood clean from my hand. No, this is my hand will rather the multitudinous seas incarnadine, making the green one red. Macbeth here, the tragic hero, feels the unbearable prick of his conscience after killing the king. He regrets his sin and believes that even the oceans of the greatest magnitude cannot wash the blood of the king off his hands. We can see the effective use of hyperbole in these lines. Now we move on to the next figure of speech, which is onomatopoeia. It refers to a word that phonetically mimics or resembles the sound of the thing it describes. For example, a type of word that sounds like what it describes: buzz, woo, boom. For example, the words we use to describe the noises that animals make are all onomatopoeic, such as a dog barks, a cat mews, or a cow moo. Interestingly, there is one fact: the onomatopoeic words are animal sounds. For animal sounds actually change quite a bit from one language to another, as the words must fit into the larger linguistic system. So even though the cat would mew in English also and Hindi also, but then it would differ. When a pig says oink in English, it says boo in Japanese, grunts in German, nor in Dutch, and so on. So this is a funny thing about language, right? Now look at this example of onomatopoeia from literature. I was just beginning to yawn with nerves, thinking he was trying to make a fool of me when I knew his tatter-tat at the door. Now this is from James Joyce's Ulysses. Some authors love to create new words. We know Shakespeare and James Joyce, they are well known for doing so. Now in this excerpt from his famous dense novel Ulysses, Joyce has created a nonce word, tatter-a-tat, for the sound of knocking at the door. A nonce word is a word that is created only for a special case. He combines other onomatopoeic words for knocking at a door like rap and tap into one long word. And interestingly, after Joyce created this word, it is now listed as the longest palindrome in English language. Right? So this is onomatopoeia, and to make it a little clear, it's not just the sounds. It is probably the way the poet weaves the words so that it produces the same effect as he is describing about. For example, there is this famous Hindi poem, चारू चंद्र की चंचल किरणें खेल रही हैं जलथल में, स्वच्छ चांदनी बिछी हुई है अवनी और अंबर तल में, पुलक प्रकट करती है धरती हरित तृणों की नोकों से, मानो झूम रहे हैं तरु भी मंद पवन के झोंकों से. Now when I am reciting this poem, you can actually feel that a breeze is blowing. Now the poet has woven the words in such a manner that it is onomatopoeic in nature, that you can feel कि हवा चल रही है, मानो झूम रहे हैं तरु भी मंद पवन के झोंकों से. So the word combination, the placing of words is so onomatopoeic that it actually creates that effect as if the wind is blowing. So these are certain figures of speech which are used in order to decorate language and make it reach to the level of literature. These are the references taken while preparing this PowerPoint presentation, and at the end I have given a Google form wherein you can take up the test for yourself. Happy learning all of you. Thank you so much.